Well, hi everybody. I'm going to try to do this without breaking up. I know if I break up a lot, it's going to get long, it's going to get boring, and I'll apologize in advance if that happens. This is a celebration of life for Doris Gail Erickson, my beloved wife of 19 years and my best friend for 22. I'm going to leave the slideshow running. This is some of our favorite photos from all over the world. This is the eclipse in Libya, in the Libyan desert. And I'm busy taking pictures and doing all kinds of things, and she screams, "Kiss me!" Oh, yeah, right. And we did eclipse cruises for quite a few years, and she went for everything else, and I went for the eclipse. And what I found out, though, that it didn't matter if there was a good eclipse or not, because if we go for everything else, that you can have a fantastic vacation regardless. She didn't love astronomy the way I do, but she always told everybody she loved me. And so she loved to be there wherever I was, whatever I was doing. And she could do astronomy outreach with the best of them, as far as talking about astronomy and galaxies and nebulae and everything else. She could tell you the root words of nebulae in the Greek and so forth, and the whole 9 yards. She could explain it all to you, and she just did that and learned all of that from me, not because she loved it, because she loved me. A couple things first. For those of you that appreciate reminders like this, this is a great time to silence your cell phone. For those of you who don't appreciate a reminder like that, well, tough. Bathrooms are out the door and through the main entrance over there, where you see some big lights. There's in a little alcove there, you'll see some bathrooms to the right. But today I want to tell you a little bit about the most fantastic best friend I've ever had in my life. This woman saved me from oblivion. She was born April 27th, 1950 in Anchorage, Alaska, in the old Providence Hospital in Alaska that no longer exists. Her parents, George Fitzhugh Klein, this was his second family. His first wife had died, and his kids were fully grown, and he had remarried a much younger woman, Marcella Maccan, I'm not sure exactly how to spell it. I never knew, and Doris didn't either. And they went to Alaska to homestead. There was 80 acres you could homestead in Alaska, and he decided to start his life over again in his late 40s in Alaska as a homesteader. And so that's where Doris was born. George, Doris's father, was a World War I anti-aircraft gunner in France. Wow. So he was a World War I vet. And we didn't know much about him. What happened is that when Doris was 3.5 years old, her father died of a heart attack. At that time he was about 56, 57. And this really devastated his wife, Marcella. And she became a recluse and became very paranoid and really struggled with the loss of her husband, having this little girl to raise in the 50s when they didn't have all of the programs and all of the support that we have today. And she eventually remarried a welder from the Air Force Base up there. And it turned out, unfortunately, he was every bit as paranoid and suspicious and eccentric as she was. Maybe, I don't know how people like that find each other, but they did. And but this was, of course, really devastating to Doris, because Doris, her dad really loved her. You got these pictures of this man, and all of these pictures, he's holding this little girl, and he can just tell that this is his life, is this little girl. And then to suddenly die and to leave his wife, his young wife, and this little girl behind, I'm sure it was not in his playbook. That was not what he wanted to see happen. And especially to have his wife become so devastated and take a dark turn from there and end up marrying an abusive man. Doris's stepdad was an abuser, and he did a lot of things to Doris and also things to his wife. Anyway, that at this point, Doris, this small child, turned to her dog as her best friend. A little black wire terrier about this big. His name was Jigs. And Jigs was her absolute best friend in the world, and every chance she got, she'd go outside and she'd crawl in the doghouse with him and spend all her time with Jigs. Well, when that went on for a few years, Jigs got older, and they decided that Jigs wasn't going to be able to survive another winter, Alaskan winter. And so her stepdad went outside and shot him in the front yard and left him there. This devastated Doris, and for the next about 6 months she crawled around the house on hands and knees and barked at him. So that was her revenge for taking away her best friend in the world. Imprinting on Jigs really had an effect on Doris. I mean, she loved dogs the whole rest of her life. Her best friend were dogs, and she used to joke that dogs make the best kids. You know, they if you're late with the dinner, they're just that much happier to see you. You know, if you anything you want to do, they're ready to do it with you. They're not going to argue. They're not going to complain. They're not going to check the watch. They're not going to check their smartphone. They're right there to do it with you. And they never turn state's evidence. So, yeah, dogs were great. At one time when Doris was in elementary school, the other kids would talk about grandparents and uncles and aunts and cousins and so forth, and this intrigued Doris, and she went home and she asked her mom, says, "Mom, do I have grandparents?" And her mom said, "None of your damn business." So just to give you a little of an idea of, you know, the difficulty there. Doris's stepdad and mom had 2 more kids, and Doris sort of became the classic Cinderella story, where she became the housekeeper and the bottle washer and so forth in her own home that her father built. And suddenly she's the one that's the unpaid help. So that, with the abuse and the paranoia and so forth, it created a very difficult childhood for Doris. One time, the fire marshal came to the school and to talk to all the kids about fire safety. You know, we've all had these things and so forth. And at the end, he offered that anybody who wanted to, that a real fireman would stop by their house in his jacket and his hat and everything, and he would check out their house and give them advice on on fire safety. Well, all the kids in the class raised their hands, so Doris sort of raised her hand too. And so there was a day after school when a fireman showed up at the front door, which completely freaked out Doris's mom and stepdad. They threatened him with a rifle and chased him off, and then they beat Doris for daring to talk to strangers about their private business. So, and I don't mean to sound negative, but I want to set some groundwork to give you an idea of what the challenges were that Doris faced that were so different than who she became. I mean, it's so easy, I think, in this modern day and age for kids, whether they mean to or not, they turn out just like their parents. And Doris didn't do that, which I am very, very thankful for. In spite of these terrible things that had happened to her and the abuse that she suffered, that they did not define who she was. Another time that the teachers called Doris's mom to school, and they said that they figured out that Doris was nearsighted, and that Mom needed to go get Doris glasses, which Mom wasn't happy about. Such things were expensive, but the school sort of, forced him into it, because Doris, she'd sit in class and she said, everything was a blur. I could see there's a board up there and there's a person talking, but I had no idea what was written on the board. I couldn't see anything. And her mom finally took her to an optometrist, and she got glasses. And as they walked home on the sidewalks in Anchorage, in Mountain View actually, which is part of Anchorage now, that Doris had these glasses on for the first time. And she's looking up into the trees and she saw, there's leaves up there. She'd never seen those leaves before. There's wires between those big poles on the corner. She'd never seen those before either. And so that was quite an epiphany for her, to have the whole world open up and see things that she didn't know existed. She was very nearsighted when she was little. Well, the problems and the abuse at home were difficult. And in her teenage years, quite often what she would do is she got pretty good at escaping from the house when her dad would reach for her. And she found a way where she could bound over the kitchen table, bound across the kitchen sink, and be out the kitchen window before he could grab her. And then she'd just run. And most of the time, child support services just took her back home again, even though she begged them not to. And basically, it told her that there's nowhere else for you to go. This is it. You got to go home. Finally, when she was 16, she was given an option to go to a girls' home in Spokane, Washington. And she said, "Yes, where is it?" It didn't matter where it was, as long as it was somewhere other than that house. And so as a young girl, all by herself, she went to Spokane, Washington, to this Catholic girls' home to go to school and eventually become an adult there, and then come back to Alaska. When she was back in Alaska, well, she, like everybody else back then, felt that for security and for to make it in life, she needed to get married and have a family. And she found a man, and she married him, and they had a kid. And I won't tell you her name for a specific reason right now, or his name. I don't want to show any disrespect for anybody that are still living that might see this video, and I don't want to bring any kind of embarrassment to anybody. But it wasn't an ideal relationship. And when her daughter turned 13 and the hormones hit, that some girls do, things went really bad, Nowadays we know a lot more about hormones. We know the things that can happen to little girls, and they have meds for that. They have treatment. They understand that some girls, that this hormone dump just completely messes up their mind, and they just turn into this screaming demon from hell with the red eyes and the head that goes all the way around and spews the green soup and so forth. And I say this, but I want to emphasize this does not mean that the child was bad. This just means that the child suffered a hormonal malfunction that she had no control over, and that basically devastated the family. She began to run with a really bad crowd, and just after she turned 18, her and her gang, when Doris was at work, they burgled her house. Whatever they couldn't steal, they destroyed. And at that time, Doris had a small, white, fluffy dog, and they tortured it with cigarettes. It was covered in cigarette burns. And when they were done, they threw the dog into a snowbank in the backyard and left. And then they headed for the border of Alaska and Canada. They caught her and her gang at the border, and they called Doris and said, "What do you want to do with her?" She says, "Well, she's 18 now. She's your problem. And you better cuff her to a chair, because if you don't, she's going to be gone in just a few minutes." Anyway, this event was enough to get her committed to a treatment facility in Texas, which helped some. But this was at a time when not a lot of effort was put into family reconciliation. And so they didn't really make any effort to reconnect Doris's daughter with Doris or her husband. And they never reconnected. The last time either of us heard from her was probably about 21 years ago, when she called Doris and wanted Doris to co-sign so she could buy a car. And we've not heard from her since. And so it's a sad deal that mom and daughter were never reconciled. I know this really bothered Doris a lot over the years. She didn't want to talk about it, but I think that there was a big gaping wound in her heart for her daughter that was never filled. Doris was interesting in the fact that Doris was a financial genius. This woman that She started planning her retirement her first day on her first part-time job as a teenager. I started planning my retirement at some point after meeting Doris. And I have to tell you, the woman was an absolute, she'd tell you she was an idiot savant, which is not really, it's like that, but she was brilliant with money. This woman took great pleasure from great columns of numbers and totaling them and seeing a total at the bottom. She took pleasure, and she could rub her fingers over the numbers and feel pleasure from that. And of course, I'm into science and astronomy and Avogadro's number and E and pi and all these kind of things. So we used to joke that she loved rational numbers and I loved irrational ones. What she did is her first job was at a dispatcher for a security firm, and like most people have jobs like that, it's rough, the hours are odd and so forth, and you're told you never do anything right and the pay is terrible. And from there she got a job as a receptionist at Providence Hospital in Alaska, and it's run by a bunch of nuns, at least it was back then. And they had real trouble with Doris because Doris had the most beautiful fingernails, the most beautiful curvature to her fingernails, and they're nice and thick and hard. She could grow the most gorgeous nails, natural nails, of any woman I've ever seen. Well, she was very proud of her nails back then, and she painted them bright red. Well, the nuns had a real problem with that. But she held her ground and wouldn't back down. And she did that for several years. And finally, the state of Alaska had a position for what's called an eligibility technician, as someone that worked basically in the Department of Health and Social Services, that when various people needed help, be it welfare or food stamps or government food, things like that, that there was an eligibility technician to work with them and find out what they qualified for and make sure they got the benefits they needed and so forth. And they needed people. They needed positions very badly. And Doris checked the benefits, and wow, there's retirement here, there's medical. I mean, wow. And she says, I can stand this. I can do this job because these benefits are really important. And so she took the job as an ET, as they call it, an eligibility technician. And she worked that job for several years. And she's the kind of person, if you've ever noticed, she observes. She watches everybody. Of course, I do too. And we always had a lot of fun people watching, because you see people do silly things or bright things, dumb things, so forth. And it turned out that her and I just saw the world almost exactly the same way. So whatever crazy thing that she saw, how she felt about it, she knew it was exactly how I felt about it. So it was a great deal of fun to even watching things like World's Dumbest on television, that we'd get pleasure from the same trash TV as far as people's behavior. But she's always watching, all the time watching. And she noticed within the Department of Health and Social Services, there was a group of auditors. They called them quality control technicians or QC auditors. And these people didn't have to deal with the public all the time. These people didn't have to deal with all of the trauma and drama so much. They just reviewed the cases that the other ETs had done and told them what they screwed up. And this looked pretty good to Doris, and so she waited for about a year, and a position came open in the quality control department as an auditor, and she jumped on it. And the boss liked her there, and she got a job as a QC auditor, and she held that job for 27 years. And what she did is she put the maximum amount of retirement every month. She did her activities, she did her dogging, she did all these things, and she built up a great retirement. This was her dowry. About this time, of course, I was somewhere else in the world, and I was doing my thing, and I was making money. I was making pretty good money, but I was even better at spending it. In fact, I used to joke that when I died, I was probably they're going to bury me under a pile of electronics and telescopes. So I'd probably live under that pile too until that time, just be all I had. But and she also had a lot of great stories, because as an auditor, she would quite often go out into the Alaskan villages, and so she was in fixed-wing planes on pontoons. She'd be out there with the big tundra tires and so forth, these little planes, and she'd fly into these villages, and they'd land on sandbars, and she'd be taking One time, actually a couple times, she rode dog teams into the village from the river. Other times that there'd be snow machines. For those of you that don't know, that in Alaska they're called a snow machine. They're not called a snowmobile. If you call it a snowmobile up there, they're going to look at you, they're going to wrinkle their nose and like, you're nobody. You don't understand. They're snow machines. I think part of the reason for that in Alaska, that it doesn't need a cowling, it doesn't need headlights. There may or may not be a seat on the thing, but if it roars and it goes and you can hang on to it somehow, it's a snow machine. It's not a mobile. There's nothing mobile about it. It's a machine. Alaskans are a little bit more rustic, I think, when it comes to things like that. But she had a lot of really great stories. For those of you that have ever had the privilege of listening to her tell her stories about Bush, Alaska, and all the places that she visited and the things that she did, and the adventures and misadventures she had. One time she visited a welfare client out in the village, and her husband came home. These were native Alaskans. And her husband was blind drunk, and he saw a white person in the house. This outraged him. He went and got a big machete, and now he's chasing Doris around their house with a machete while his wife is screaming and dragging onto him and telling Doris to escape. Well, they did a couple of turns around the kitchen table, and Doris managed to make it to the door and out the door. And he made it about to the door when his wife tripped him, and he fell flat on his face and smashed his face on the, I guess what passed for a landing on the door. And she had a lot of stories like this, just the misadventures and things that she'd done and people she met, and some great people she'd met out in the villages. And the one time that the plane come in and there's a lot of wind and so forth, aiming for the sandbar, and they ended up nose into the water, into the river. And that screwed up her neck. If you knew her, she knew she had a little bit of a screwed up neck. But just a lot of fantastic stories from her time as a quality control auditor for the state of Alaska. Anyway, going back to the marriage just for a second, that when things were darkest with her daughter and things were so desperate and she didn't know what she was going to do and she was so overwhelmed, she turned to her husband and she said, I've got to have your help in this. I can't do this alone. I must have your help. I don't know what to do. I'm totally out of my element. I'm completely overwhelmed. I need you to be involved. He turned to her and he said, well, I don't think she's my daughter anyway. That was the precise second that their marriage ended. I mean, they still were in the same house, but Doris said she never in her life ever felt more betrayed and devastated and alone than she did at that moment. So they were together for several more years before a day came when Doris took her Ford Aerostar van, which only had 2 seats in it. The rest was full of dog kennels and bumpers and the stench of dead ducks and shotguns and things like that. She loved field trial retrievers. She loved to train dogs. Once again, her dogs were her passion. She took and filled up her van with her own clothes. She took a smaller TV set, got her dogs, got all of her dog and stuff, and she paid off the house and gave it to him. She paid off his twin-engine diesel boat, fishing boat in Alaska, and gave it to him. And she left and she started her life over again. Just with her clothes and her dogs. She felt that's all she needed. And there I want to stop her story for a minute, and I want to tell you a little bit about mine, but only as a segue to bring you back to her story again. That in Alaska, I was in a difficult marriage. It turned out that my first wife had a mental disability that made life extremely difficult for her and also very difficult for me. For those of you that might know what borderline personality disorder is, you understand. And for those of you that don't, I'd suggest you research it. Make sure your kids and the young people in your life know what this is so they can avoid it. Basically, it happens mostly to women, and when a woman as a small child is severely and usually sexually abused, that certain parts of their personality, certain parts of their mental development are arrested at that age, be it 3 years old, 5, 7, or whatever. And so it's possible you can have an adult a 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old adult who can have a wild physical tantrum like a 3-year-old. And to people who don't understand what this disability is, it's really confusing. You think you're dealing with Jekyll and Hyde. You don't understand what's happening or why. And you figure maybe there's something you can do. And because you don't understand the problem, there's no fixing it. And these people suffer a lot. I mean, I want to tell you, these people suffer more than anybody else you can possibly imagine suffer. They're afraid of everything in the world, and the number one defense mechanism is aggression. And this is the most difficult combination of characteristics a person could ever hope not to have. Well, my first wife suffered from BPD, and I didn't know what it was. It wasn't until years later when I drugged my children to counseling, weekly counseling, by the way. They each had their own counselors that got drugged there weekly, that the counselor wanted my ex-wife to come in for a session with us. I said, sure, if you can get her here, yeah, no problem. That's great. You know, I don't think she's going to come, but here's her contact information. Well, she managed to get her there for one session, and it was a fiery session, as you can imagine. And afterwards, when everybody else had left the room except me, and I had the privilege of filling out the check to pay for all of this counseling, she says, there's a couple of books I want you to buy. I said, okay, anything to help my kids with this difficult problem we had. It says the first one is called Walking on Eggshells, and the second book is called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. I said, whoa, what are these books about? She says, these are books about a fairly complex mental illness called borderline personality disorder. She says, have you ever heard of that? I said, no. Says, well, it's very complex, but I think they might help you to more effectively understand and deal with your ex-wife. And I said, are you saying my ex-wife has borderline personality disorder? And she said, I am not saying that. She is not my patient. I'm just telling you, buy the damn books. Okay. And so I bought the books, and it was probably the most effective piece of advice I'd ever received for helping my children to understand what was happening and why we had the challenges in that family that we did. But rewinding back a little bit, that I didn't know this during the marriage to my first wife, and things are getting crazier and crazier, and the behavior is crazier and crazier, and finally I caught her with another man. I mean, just cold to rights, caught her with a man, and the only cause was everything that was hidden before was now just done right out in the open, and I could either like it or lump it. Now, I'm going to Seward for the weekend with Martin, and you get to watch the kids. You know, and if you got a problem with that, tough. And so I put up with that for a while, but no matter how much I tried to accommodate for the children, she would just find one more level to push it to. And finally I felt that I had no choice but to file for divorce. I felt maybe I could do more for my children outside of this marriage than I could do inside of it. And I filed for divorce. And that was a terrible thing. For those of you who have ever been through a divorce, it feels like death. It's the same as, it feels like how I feel now losing my spouse. It hurts. You feel like a failure. You feel like life has come to an end. You feel like there's just no point. You just don't know where you're going next. You don't know what life holds for you. Nothing matters. You don't eat anymore. And you just stop caring. And you're very miserable. Well, in my case, that I felt all of those things and more. But I soldiered on because you have to, right? What else are you going to do? And I had just recently taken a job for the state of Alaska. Before that, I had worked for, I took a job with a phone company. Just before that, I had worked 5 years and 2 days for the state of Alaska. I got vested in their retirement program and then left and took my soul with me. So, and the problem, though, is that I was working in the Commissioner's Office of Health and Social Services for the state. And I was the IT specialist who helped about 100 offices, little small offices all over Anchorage and the greater Anchorage area. And there's only one of me. And so how was I going to do that? What I decided to do is that in every office, I would pick the smartest, most technically astute, computer literate person I could find. I'd train that one person and let them support that office and then not support that one person. So when they had a question they couldn't answer, they'd call me, but everybody else in the office talked to them. And this system worked fairly well. When I went to the phone company and got a big pay raise and better benefits and things like this, and I was fully vested in the state. In fact, I made the phone company wait 3 months so I could fully vest to the state before I left to make sure I get that retirement. That they didn't replace my position for 9 months. Well, I was one of the first people back then who always carried a pager, and I had one of the earliest cell phones, and since the state wouldn't pay for them, I paid for them, but I made sure that everybody had the numbers, because in my experience, I'd much rather have the people I support find me easily than not be able to find me at all. If they can find me easily and I could tell them, well, I'm not going to be able to get to you until tomorrow afternoon, at least that answer, they had less stress than not knowing what's going on. So I felt it was less stressful for the people I supported by making sure that they could get a hold of me easily. When I went to the phone company, I kept my cell phone, I kept my pager, and because my position was empty for 9 months, these people out of desperation kept calling me. And so I talked to my boss of the phone company. He says, well, you know, the state's a really big customer of ours, and as long as you can do your job and help all them too, keep doing it. Keep helping them. You know, they need help, and just good PR. And we'll write it off as just public relations. And so I had a lot of calls from state offices, people looking for help. Well, one of those offices was the Quality Control Office in Anchorage. And one day, Doris Haney, that was her previous name from her first marriage. It wasn't her maiden name, her previous marriage. And she called up and she had a question about tape backups and tape rotations and so forth on the server, and so I answered all of her questions. And she says, oh, by the way, you know, I hear through the grapevine that you filed for divorce. She says, is that true? And I said, well, yeah, unfortunately it's true. I just, it was one of those things that it was a very, very difficult marriage, and things were just getting progressively worse and worse, and finally I got to the point that I felt maybe I could do more for my kids outside of it than inside of it. And she says, but you always seem so happy. You had pictures of your kids, you had pictures of your wife, you said what a good cook she was and everything, that none of us had any idea. And I said, well, if you're trying to fix something, what sense does it make to go badmouth that person or air your dirty laundry to other people? Besides, who wants to hear it? Everybody's got their own problems. They don't have time for mine. Nobody cares about my problems. She says, well, that was probably a good perspective. She says, so what are you going to do now? I said, I don't know. So I'm middle-aged. I'm gravitationally challenged. I'm a little bit asymmetric. You know, I'm a geek. I'm a hot, wet mess. I don't know. I'll probably be single for a very long time, maybe the rest of my life, but it's okay because it was better than where I was. And maybe now, when I got the freedom to control this money that I earn, I can do things to my children that I couldn't do inside that marriage. And she said, oh, there's women out there that would be happy to date you. You know, you're a nice guy. You're smart. You know, you're not bad looking. You know, you're not as fat as you think you are. And you know, yes, I am. Says you won't be alone forever. And I says, well, I think I might be, but it's okay. It's okay. It's better than where I was. And she said, well, you know, if you were to ask me out for a date, I wouldn't say no. And I said, say what? And she said, don't make me repeat that. I could barely say it the first time. And unbeknownst to me, this woman, when I was coming around to these offices, taking care of all the computers and so forth, that she had fallen in love with me. And she was crazy about me, but because I was happily married, she respected that. I never had a clue, not even a hint, that she even so much as liked me. She respected that absolutely and left me alone. But the moment she found out that I was getting divorced, man. Well, dating was sort of an odd thing that, because she liked training dogs, field trial retrievers, and then every weekend, every spare month, she's off training dogs, and I'm doing IT stuff, and I'm doing side jobs for people. In fact, two of my best clients in Alaska are sitting right here. They came from Alaska. They're here. Bruce and Shelby Davison, known them for many years, and they're here to support us today. And they're my great friends from formerly from Alaska, now from Pendleton, Oregon. They came from Pendleton just to be here today, which, and other people here. I just appreciate all of you so much. It's so great to see the fact that we filled all the chairs. I mean, we didn't quite run out, which is great. And thank you to everybody for being here to support us today. This means really a lot to me. Doris is a very private person, and she'd probably be upset with me for sharing her stories. But I hope not, because I want you all to know what a fantastic, wonderful person she was, and how selfless she was, and the things she did. Basically, Doris saved me. I was a hot, wet mess. I was depressed. I didn't see any hope in the world. And this woman saved me. I mean, like I said, I was probably the biggest liability, the biggest, mushiest, confused, directionless mush. And she wanted me so bad that she put up with all that, and she resurrected me. She rebuilt me. For those of you that know me as this confident, arrogant, know-it-all engineer character that can do anything and is invincible and so forth, that's Doris. That is Doris that created that. She's the person who always, we've known each other for 22 years, married for 19. There was never one moment in all that time that she ever disappointed me or broke my heart, lied to me, betrayed me in any way, or wasn't 100% loyal to me. And I cannot express, there are no words to describe how awesome that is, and how much I miss that, and how spoiled I was. And I felt invincible on top of the world because of her. Because the way she saw me and the way she supported me, then everything and anything that I wanted to do. Doris didn't like Hawaii. It's too hot, it's too humid, and there's no seasons. She liked seasons. But I love astronomy, and Waikolo Village, if you love astronomy, Waikolo Village is the mecca of planet Earth to live, if you love astronomy. And so that's why we came here, and she came here to support me. In hindsight, I wish I hadn't brought her here. Astronomy was not worth it to me if she wasn't happy. She didn't know she was going to be unhappy in this heat and humidity, but once I found out she did, it was a matter of, I needed to get her out, but I didn't get a chance to do that. And now I feel bad about that. I feel really bad that I didn't have her where she wanted to be. Because, Doris loved to travel. I mean, if you look at some of these slides, that was taken in Italy, in Milan. We went on eclipse cruises in the Mediterranean. That's Growler Pond in Arizona, hiking in Arizona, and the Superstition Mountains. I think that was bicycling in Alaska. There's Kauai Harbor. I mean, Doris loved to travel, and she loved to explore, and whenever she was in one place too long, she got irritable. But never at me. Somebody else had to pay for it, I didn't have to. But anyway, so now we have Doris has decided that I'm the guy she wants. And things are getting a little bit serious between us. And I thought, I need to tell her that I have a really crazy ex-wife and two really twisted up little girls and another little boy that isn't really mine that has lived with us, but we have no legal claim on. He's a Native Alaskan boy that had no home to go to or anything, and we brought him in. We had no legal standing to have him. And if the village found out we had him, they'd just take him away and send him to the village, which would have devastated his life. And so, difficult challenges. And my ex was really good at convincing everybody that I was an abuser, that I was a wife beater, that I was this massive ogre. Which is funny because she'd be saying this out of one corner of her mouth, the other she'd be demanding to know where I'm at and telling me that I'm her property. And I have no right to leave, I have to come home because she owns me. well, if I'm this really crazy abuser, why do you want me? Shouldn't you be happy to let me go? But so I had to sit down with Doris, and I explained the challenges I had, and because when things were getting serious, I wanted her to know what kind of baggage I had to bring to this relationship that she's going to have to deal with. Whether I wanted her to have to deal with it or not, it was going to be there. And so I told her the stories, and I told her about the accusations my ex-wife had made, and the accomplished liar that she was. I mean, the things that she would do. She'd be with her friends at a church, and she liked to rock climb and do things like this. So she'd get a bruise on her arm or something. One of her friends said, "Oh, what happened to you?" "Well, Chris was in a bad mood last night." And then I'd get side blasted from somebody for beating my wife. So, "What are you talking about?" "Well, the bruises on her arm." And to them, that was absolute proof. There was undeniable proof that I was a wife beater. And there was no other way to see it from their perspective. And I said, "Well, she's a rock climber. I didn't do that." "Yeah, right." And so, I lost a lot of friends because my ex made it sure that their wives were convinced that I was an abuser and that their husbands were not allowed to go out and play with me. They could not be around me because I was a monster. And so I expected that my ex was going to do the same thing to Doris. So I told her all these stories as this is what she's going to accuse me of, and this is what you're going to have to deal with, and this is the craziness that's happened. Most of the stories about my first marriage, I have to play down the facts to make the stories more believable, because no one will believe the truth of how crazy they were and the things that she did. People say, "Well, no mother would do that to her own children." Well, yeah, they would. Anyway, so Doris heard all of this, and she said, "Well, I don't believe it." I said, "Well, I'm grateful for that." And she says, "I'll find out for myself." So I'm not afraid. But she had to always, whenever I tried to go for visitation, she had to go with me, because if I was ever alone for a minute, my ex would call the police and claim that I was attacking her, that I had a gun, shooting at the house, and she's trying to get me killed. So Doris had to be with me every last second when I went to pick up my kids or drop them off for visitation to protect me from the accusations and the chaos. Because, when the police show up at a situation like this, they always assume man bad, woman good. Unless absolutely proven otherwise with irrefutable evidence. And then the man is just merely suspicious from then on. And so Doris had to be in the middle of this all the time. Now, Doris would tell anybody who asked that kids gave her hives. And I really saw hives raised on Doris when the little kids that come up, because it was amazing. We could be in a room, in a crowd, and little kids would come in. They would run to Doris. And to her, it was like having spiders running at you. And then the kids would just love her. And I think what it was is, to most adults, kids are invisible. So Doris is like, "Ah!" She was looking at him. "Oh, there's an adult paying attention. Hi!" And so kids really did give her hives. Well, she was there to support me with picking up the kids and dropping them off. And of course, it's my own daughter whose phone is not muted.
It's the dog alarms.
And anyway, I'm sorry. I'm running too long. I'm sorry.
No.
To me, these are really important stories to share, because I want you to know who she was. And some of the negative things have to be there for the context for the positive things. And it's all part of the same big story. Anyway, one time at Christmas time, we went to pick up the girls, and my ex was at this house that she was taking care of, this quadriplegic that lived there. And she wanted, before she'd let the kids come for Christmas, she wanted me to come into the house, and she wanted a private conversation with me in the back room of the house. And I refused. I says, "Whatever you need to tell me, I'll come to the front porch, and you can talk to me there, but I'm not coming into the house." She says, "Well, if you don't come into the house, you're not getting the kids." And at that point, I was actually sending Ashley back and forth with the messages. Then Ashley told me, "Dad, please don't send me back. Don't put me in the middle of this." And I went, "Oh, good grief, I'm doing it. I'm putting my kids in the middle." I've tried so hard not to do that. And I apologized to Ashley. I went to the door, and I told my ex, I says, "No, I can't come inside to talk to you. If we can't talk through the door, there's nothing to discuss." And she says, "Well, you can't have the kids in." And she slammed the door and locked it. So I went back to the van, and I got in the van with Doris. And now we got two little girls with their little beautiful little backpacks on their back in the picture when they're going like this, watching their dad drive off. And I tell you, watching that hurt me so bad. But this was the norm for this relationship. But this time, Doris says, that's enough. We're going for custody. Doris decided we needed to have custody of these two little girls. I never would have asked her to do that. And it took years to do it. The court systems and the bureaucracies are so painful and incompetent, and so many judges are so apathetic and indifferent. One time, my attorney was trying to make an argument before the judge, and the judge is on his hands and knees under the podium up at front, thumping around looking for a pin that he dropped. He comes up with a pin, sits in the chair, starts bouncing off of his forehead. It's like, this is life or death for these kids. We're talking about the lives of these children here, and he can't be bothered to pay attention. I mean, I talk about feeling very jaded about the system and how there's so much lip service given to protecting children that it's just that. It's just lip service. The children aren't protected. Nobody cares about the children. The bureaucracy just sort of trundles along until finally the children are 18 and they're screwed up adults. Well, I didn't want my kids to be screwed up adults. And people say, oh, kids are tough. Kids survive. I didn't want my kids to survive to be screwed up adults. I wanted my kids to prevail. I wanted my kids to be talented, capable, and to prevail in this world. And that was my goal, not just to survive. And that was a lot of work. When I first filed for divorce, my first divorce attorney said, well, you need to understand something right away here, that in Alaska at this time, that if you want to get, Mike in front here is nodding, he knows the same horror story that I went through, that you want your kids in Alaska, here's what it's going to take. You're going to have to be in the courtroom, and your soon-to-be ex-wife's going to whip out a hatchet. And she's going to chase the judge around the courtroom and get into at least 3 really good whacks. If she does that, you might get your kids. Anything less than that, you're not getting the kids. So just know that up front. Don't even waste the money trying, because you will not get your kids. I got my kids. It wasn't because I was so fantastic. It's because the child investigator, a woman who some would call a feminazi, for the first time in her 20-year career, gave custody to a father over a mother. First time she had ever done that. And the whole time in court, when this determination was being read and the decision of the investigator was being read, the investigator sat with my wife, ex-wife, in the courtroom, consoling her and rubbing her back as she announced that she was giving our kids to me and not to her. It devastated her, but that was the situation we're in. So now Doris and I got 2 really twisted up, very unhappy, very traumatized little girls to try to straighten out. My ex has visitation, and this is another, it's just a different thankless situation where my ex would tell the children, well, if you're not living with me, maybe I should just go ahead and commit suicide. If you don't take my side, inspiring your father and tell me stuff and bring me stuff that, I don't love you. And she'd triangulate my daughters against each other. She would take turns which one she loved and which one she didn't, and make the girls compete for her love and all of these head trips. Doris did not deserve any of this. Doris did not deserve all the angst, all the trouble, all of the chaos from ex-wife, the chaos from my poor twisted up kids. Who aren't twisted anymore. They're actually pretty good kids now. And they will tell you, and they'll get a chance, if they have enough courage, to tell you what they think of Doris as their step monster. But Doris took him to string camp. Doris got Ashley a ferret. And I said, no, you're not having a ferret. We have enough chaos with everything. We don't need a ferret in this house. I get a call from the pet store. And Doris says, you better get down here and defend yourself. But Ashley's coming home with a ferret. So I go to the pet store, and there's this ferret that Ashley's fallen in love with. And of course, parent that's ever had a kid that's gotten a pet, you've lost. So they hand me this ferret, and he promptly runs up my neck and bites a mole. So that was my introduction to the ferret, George. And meanwhile, this entire time, kids still give Doris hives. I mean, her experience with her own daughter was so painful. And then she's got 2 more twisted up little girls that to also try her best to raise and be there for. They aren't even hers. And we had private violin lessons. We had private piano lessons. I put them both in private school. Put Ashley in the best private school I could find. I put Sydney in the best charter school I could find because she was younger. In fact, at the private school we had for Ashley, there was that was spring trip or summer winter? The field trip? You'd never guess where the field trip was. Mainland China. I didn't get to go. I've not been to China yet, but my daughter has. I was trying to do everything possible within my power to create as positive of an environment for these kids as I could, of wholesome, meaningful things as far as Christmases, Thanksgiving. For those of you that come to our house every year for, we call it the land of misfit toys. The older retired people and so forth don't have any family here. We'd have a Thanksgiving or Christmas, invite everybody to join us and so forth. There's a little bit of the same tradition, basically try to have fun and a positive experience. The same thing we did for our kids. And with all of this wild chaos from the other side, we felt at times like we were spitting in the wind. We just did not have a chance, but we had to do the right thing. We had to keep the kids out of the middle, never use the kids to pass messages, never use the kids to play games, and we never, ever messed with the head of my ex-wife. Because if we, in the slightest way, messed with her head, 2 little girls are going to pay for it. I mean, she thinks we messed with her, but we didn't, because we knew who would suffer. And so it is a very thankless situation to be in, but we did our best. I figured, Doris told me one time that we spent probably $250,000 on my kids, between schools and therapy, weekly therapy sessions, and divorce attorneys and custody investigators and everything else. He says, it would have been a lot smarter to just simply offer your ex $20,000 to sign him over to us, as you probably would have done it. I said, you're probably right. I never thought of that. In hindsight, that would have been a much better investment. But we didn't do that. But Doris put up with all that. When it come time for Ashley wanted to go to string camp for violin and cello and so forth, and she was very excited about it, they didn't have enough camp counselors for the girls' cabins. And so this woman, who kids give her hives, and they really did, I would never have asked her to do this, but she volunteered to be a cabin counselor so Ashley could go to string camp. When she told me she decided to do that, I was like, I never would have asked her. I mean, I was like, are you willing to go out and play in traffic? This was inconceivable that she would be willing to do this for Ashley, not even her own child. But I think with Doris, is she identified so strongly with what these little girls are going through compared to her own childhood, that she could not stand by and let it happen. She could not just turn her face away and let it happen. She had to do something. And she gave her all, everything, at all times, in every way, to support these kids and to support me and save us. And I'll never be able to repay her and be able to make it up to her what she sacrificed for us. It's just not possible. And, it's funny that there's been a number of times we've had people that we've known, and young people sometimes that are in financial straits and other problems. And a big secret is Doris was actually, as tight as she was and as good as she was with money, she would either loan or give money to people. She would. And never tell anybody, never make a big deal out of it, never want to thank you, never want any kind of expression of appreciation. That would have made her feel awkward. She would not have appreciated that. Just before Christmas, on Facebook, I discovered 2 of the women I went to school with, who I had not seen in, 45 years, and had no contact with. In fact, in high school, I barely knew them. That they were 2 sisters, and they're working in Oregon as nurses' aides in an old folks' home. And apparently, Oregon changed their law that the number of nurses' aides required per patients in nursing homes was cut in half. And immediately, half of all of the nurses' aides in Oregon lost their job, including these two women. And there was a nursing home opening up in Post Falls, Idaho, and so they packed up their car and drove to Post Falls for this job. Well, they got there. There was some bureaucratic delays with the certification of the center, and there was no job. And they didn't know when there was going to be a job for the center, when it was finally going to be approved for occupancy. And they were in desperate straits. They asked on Facebook for like a GoFundMe or something like that. They're looking for $400 so they could have a hotel room to get them through January 1st, when they hoped that the certification would come through, so they wouldn't have to live in their car from middle of December until January in North Idaho, which is very snowy. It's 100 miles from the Canadian border. And I read that on Facebook, and I told Doris about it. And I says, man, there are times I have to be so grateful for what we have. You know, just so easy, just these little decision changes at different points in your life. It's so easy that any of us could be in that position. Any of us. There's none of us that are immune from that. Just the smallest decision at some point in our life, and that's where we could be. Yeah. And Doris agreed and says, so how much money are we going to send them? And I said, well, I don't know. What do you think? I said, let's send them $600, which is more than they asked for. And so we sent them $600 through the GoFundMe on Facebook. And we had a chance to make it anonymous, and I knew what Doris was going to do. I says, do you want me to check the anonymous box? And she said, of course. And so we sent them $600 through Facebook to help them out. And they don't know we even did it. And I don't think they're ever going to see this video, so I'm not too concerned about them finding out. But Doris did this all the time. And, you know, she would never ask for a thank you. She would never ask for acknowledgement. She didn't want anybody to know that she's doing these things. She says, well, if people find out how generous I am, we're going to be bothered all the time. So, you know, we don't tell anybody, you know. We'll just keep it a secret, and we'll help those people we feel really need help and people we like. And, you know, there's people in this room right here that Doris has helped that know that the world will never know, because Doris would never tell anybody, and I'm sworn to secrecy that I can't tell anybody either. And like I said, I was a hot, wet mess, and this one picked me up and put the pieces back together and turned me into the insufferable engineer that I am today. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the sacrifice and how selfless of a thing she did for me, and also for my little girls, that they're here today, and they're both, you know, climbing the corporate ladder. They're doing their things. They're taking their classes and so forth, and working hard to better their lives. I've got 3 beautiful grandchildren now, and you know, I'm very grateful that it could have been so easily so different for my children. You know, that I have close friends in this room who have kids that aren't alive today because they made bad decisions, little decisions that were just bad and just a little bit in the wrong direction. And because of those seemingly innocent decisions at the time, they're not with us now. And nobody can think that they're above that. This can happen to anybody. Anyway, finally our girls were growing and on their own. I'll be happy to say we had them both on the honor rolls at different times in school. Very proud of them for that. And as empty nesters, we decided to come to Hawaii and play at astronomy and scuba diving. I was a scuba instructor in Alaska and so forth, and enjoyed that. And Doris didn't care for scuba diving, but she really liked me, so she certified to scuba dive. And we dove Truck Lagoon, the Caribbean and so forth, and then Alaska. And we had a lot of really fun scuba diving vacations until the person who organized these expeditions passed away suddenly from a heart attack. And that's when we switched to eclipse cruises, which was actually a lot of fun. If you guys ever want to have a really great vacation, go on an eclipse cruise. You get to have a cruise, you get to see someplace wonderful in the world, and there's an eclipse in the middle of it. And so it's something for everybody, right? And It was a lot of fun. In fact, many times we had got neighbors to come with us and other close friends to come with us on these Eclipse cruises. And the great thing about a cruise, which never occurred to me because it seemed like that's just too decadent, the nice thing about it is you unpack in your hotel room once. Your hotel room moves all over the place to all these different places. Then you repack from your hotel room once when you go to fly back. So you only got to unpack and pack one time. And the hotel room goes everywhere, which is pretty cool. And especially if you have friends with you, that these kind of trips are so much more fun when you have a bunch of friends together to share the experience. We also have done a fair amount of volunteer work at the Onizuka Viz, doing astronomy outreach, and also with CARES. That we did dog foster care for a while. That we'd take in these dogs and give them a foster home and assess them and clean them up and see what their issues are and so forth, and try their best to get them ready for adoption. And one little fella who had been tortured and abandoned, and he failed at 4 adoptions. And when he was going out the door for the 4th adoption, Doris says, you know, if he comes back again, let's just keep him. I said, I am so glad you said that. And he's the dog we have now, Jake. If you've not met Jake before, please come over and meet him. He's the most comedic, intelligent, creative, interactive dog you'll ever meet. He is absolutely a gem. But we had to quit fostering dogs because he'd get so jealous. We'd breed another dog and he'd be devastated. He was very insecure, and so we had to really work with him, be careful, because another dog would come in. One time, he went through the house and he picked up all of his toys and put them in his toy box. I didn't know dogs did that. Okay? I didn't know dogs could do that. He picked up all his toys, put them in his toy box, and stood guard over it. Whenever the other dog walked in, but he actually had several anxiety attacks when we had other dogs, because he would be misbehaving. He'd be the spoiled kid that would be acting out, and so I admonish him to leave the other dog alone, and he had several anxiety attacks at different times because of that. Just my disapproval and telling him no and stay and no and so forth was devastating. And being a dog, I really couldn't explain it to him. So finally we gave up on the dog foster care because it was just too hard on him. He couldn't understand, and each time he felt he's being betrayed. And so he's not the only dog. We got a cat that he tolerates. Another rescue cat. Doris rescued that cat too. But and he is just an absolute bundle of joy. There's no dog you'll ever meet that's more creative, more fun, and more of an imp than Jake. Anyway, the last few years of retirement, Doris got bored. Retirement's a lot of fun, but she liked to do something. And so what she decided to do was prepare taxes for people as a tax professional for fun. Yeah. I would chew off my leg to escape from doing taxes, and she did them for fun. And if you ever had a chance to the tax office to watch her, that she would deal with some of these people, and she would ask some of these questions like, okay, what is your mailing address? No. What is the address where you receive your mail? Where do you get your mail? Mail? Do you get mail? Okay, where do you live? Yeah, I live in Hawaii too. Where do you live? What is your address? And she was amazingly patient with some of these people, people from places like Samoa or Fiji and so forth, American Samoa, so they're Americans. When they come over here, and life is a lot more complicated here than it is in some of those communities. And some of the things we need to know in modern world, they don't quite understand. Okay, how many kids do you have? How many of them are yours? Yeah. Do they live with you? No, every day. Do you see them every day in your house? Do they have somewhere else they sleep? No. Now, how many are your kids? And giving these confused answers, and she'd be so patient with these people. And some of the people that she worked with in the office are here, and they can attest to this, that she'd be so good with them. It was like watching a whisperer of some kind as she would work with these people and get this information to fill out these forms. And she would take one box at a time, and she would work with them until she got that box full, and she'd go to the next box, and she'd work with them until she got that box full, and work down the list, and she would crank them out. And the owner of the tax office, Randy, used to tell me, that woman, she's a cash cow. She sits over there and she just cranks them out, cranks them out, cranks them out, never complains. She's the only person here that likes her job and just cranks them out, and she loves it. And to her, she loved the numbers and she liked helping people. To her, it was a challenge that she loved to conquer, to be able to work with these people and help them to get their taxes filed. And she says, no, we are not the IRS. We're here to help you deal with the IRS. No, I don't work for the IRS. No, really, I don't. These kind of questions you had to answer. It's unfortunate that when Doris was 13, that both her mom and her stepdad smoked, and that was the point that she began to steal cigarettes from her mom's purse and started to smoke. And she smoked, not heavily, but she smoked steadily until she met me. I didn't smoke. I hated smoking. And but I didn't pound on her on it. Basically, she smoked when I met her, so that's, there wasn't anything concealed there. She worked very hard to conceal the fact she still smoked for my daughters. And she didn't want anybody else to start smoking. And within the first 2 years of knowing me, she managed to quit, and she stayed quit until she passed. But it was probably since summertime until now, she'd be getting weaker, a little bit out of breath, not feeling on top of her game, still biking with us on Sundays, doing other things, just not quite the endurance. And we thought, well, maybe we're just getting older. Maybe we're just slowing down because we're getting a little older, and maybe we're a little too round, and we got to keep working on getting rid of this. And we weren't sure. And I thought maybe she's got a cold, maybe she's got bronchitis. And I said, well, maybe we need to go to the doctor. So no, we got scheduled doctor's appointments into the next month. It'll wait till then. Well, one morning she had a really severe pain in the calf of her leg, and I texted a good friend of mine who is a doctor, and he said, take her to the emergency room, take her right now, don't let her tell you no, just take her. And so I bundled her up and I took her to the emergency room, and they found what's called a deep vein thrombosis, or a blood clot in the lung, a blood clot in the leg. And they did a chest x-ray, and they found that she had stage 4 lung cancer. Now I'll tell you guys that the symptoms of many cancers, especially lung cancer, are so subtle. The chance of catching it at stage 1, where it's operable, are almost non-existent. For those of you, I would suggest if you've ever smoked, and then also the doctor told us, it's not so much how long you smoked. They feel nowadays it's more about when you started. If you started as a teenager before you're fully grown, you're much more likely to have lung cancer later in life, which was all news to us. We thought that last 20 years of not smoking would give us some credit, that it wasn't going to be the case. But I would suggest get a chest x-ray and get the exposure optimized for picking up things like lung tumors, because a chest x-ray is like any other kind of picture. There can be different exposure settings. There's exposure settings to study bones, there's exposure settings to study soft tissues and so forth. But get checked. If you can catch it at stage 1, where it's much more survivable than stage 3 or 4, where it is not survivable. From the time that they first detected and told us that Doris had stage 4 lung cancer and it was terminal, and there was a 10% chance she would live 2 years. At that point, we had a month and a half, and we didn't know it. And at that point, everything else in my life came to a halt. As all my friends can tell you, that all the projects, everything else I was doing, everything came to a halt. And I became Doris's nurse, primary champion, and everything else. And she was so worried I was going to be mad at her for smoking earlier. And I said, are you kidding? She says, if I was mad at anybody, I'd be mad at that 13-year-old kid all those years ago that decided to smoke, not at you. And that's the person who made this foolish decision. If I had a time machine, I would go back and I'd smack her around and say, don't you smoke. I'd tell her off. At this point, no, there's no way. It's inconceivable that I could be mad at you about this. And she was worried about my job and all the things I'm doing. And says, sweetie, It says, the one place in the whole planet I want to be is right here by your side. There's nowhere else in the world I'd rather be. And I love taking care of you. I hate why I have to, but I love taking care of you. And I did the best job I could to take care of her from that moment on. Sometimes I have to run down to the grocery store 10 minutes away and grab something and race back, and I'd be terrified that something would happen while I was gone. And how fast I could explain to a cop why I was going so fast to Waikoloa Village. And there were so few things that she could eat. And I told her, I said, you know, I'm not going to be the world's best nurse and cook here, but I'm a fast learner. And I'm going to keep getting better the more I do this. So just be patient with me as I learn how to cook. Because Doris spoiled me rotten. She was a fantastic cook. I never needed to cook. Now I needed to cook. And there's so many things that she would ask for that once I made them, the smell wasn't good and she couldn't eat it. And I went through a lot of food finding things that she was able to eat. And then we found the doctor finally suggested a medication called dronabinol, which is a derivative from cannabis, which is sort of like the appetite part of cannabis, and that helped her to have more of an appetite. So I'm really grateful for that pill. That helped a lot. But I have to tell you, there's no place in the world I'd rather have been than at her side, taking care of her as best as I could this last month and a half. And I miss her so much. I'll never be able to replace her. I was so spoiled. She was so fantastic. And I don't know what I'm going to do now. I just don't know what the future holds for me now. I feel like half of me has been torn away and it's gone, and I'm only half a person now. And one more thing I want to suggest to you is that as we got older and rounder and whiter, that I stopped taking pictures of the two of us together. I was embarrassed by my fatness, by my whiteness, gray, and things like this. And that was one of the worst mistakes I could have possibly made. I regret that so much right now because I don't have really great pictures of the two of us in the last years. So, because at some point, whoever you're with, there'll be a moment when one of you, we don't know which one of you, that's all you're going to have left. Take those pictures. Dress up, sit on the couch, put a tripod up, go to a studio, have a friend do it, a selfie with your camera, do it. Take those pictures together. Now, all those happy moments, all those smiles, all those hanging on to each other, because right now I'd give anything for more of those pictures that I don't have, because for the last 10 years I stopped taking them. And I regret that more than anything right now. So take those pictures. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but you sure heard it today. Anyway, that sort of concludes everything I wanted to say about Doris, to give you an idea who this fantastic person was in my life that saved me, saved my little girls, and made my life absolutely the most fantastic, fun, adventurous trip I could have ever wanted. And I don't know what I'm going to do now. I mean, you can see pictures of Libya, there's pictures of Europe, there's pictures in Australia, New Zealand. She loved to travel. I never would have traveled. I was happy to stay home and play with electronics and be on the computer and do stupid stuff like that. And I look back and think, man, is that stupid. This is where the fun was. All of these memories with Doris. Travel, get out there and see the world before it's too late. Anyway, I don't know what the program says, what happens next or whatever, but what I'd like to do, and I think is compatible with the program, is for anybody who wants to say something or share some thoughts, that I want to give you guys a chance to come up here. Or I think, Tom, do you have a microphone you're willing to pass around? Oh, okay. Luke back there, the guy with the beard and glasses on top of his head, has a microphone. And we're making a recording because there's a lot of people here that couldn't make it today. And this video is for them so they can share in this. And I want the video to be available to them so they can see and share in this. Also to let you know that Doris had no family. I was it. In fact, one of my good friends gave away Doris at our wedding. That Steve Simpkins, who isn't here today, and and Mike Olson was my best man. That Steve Simpkins gave away Doris because she had no family, because her mom was so secretive and didn't tell anybody, and we don't know what happened in her family back in Texas. I should say Texas. That we don't know. And it wasn't until her father had been dead 50 years that his death records became public record, and we were able to find out some genealogy, and she was able to find a niece and an aunt back in Texas. We went and visited one time, and Doris always wanted to go back, but because her niece smoked very heavily, Doris didn't want to start smoking again, and she kept trying to quit. The niece did, and so we kept waiting to go back until after she quit. Unfortunately, her niece died of stomach cancer, the complications from smoking, 2 years ago. So Doris only got to see her that one time, but they talked on the phone constantly. And so my kids and me, we're all the family that Doris has, and all of you are the friends that we have. Doris has no other family. We're it. Which Doris would tell you, well, that's all I need. She didn't need a huge family, she needed us. So that's all I got to say, and I think my daughter Ashley would like to come up and try to say something without choking up. And someone's going to read some of the telegrams? Are you going to do that? Sydney will, okay.
Hi, I'm Ashley. Dad kind of covered the whole past part of it, so I don't need to go into that. But I think I'm going to start with when I first met her for the first time. Dad had come to get us for our weekly dinners, and we lived in Eagle River, so there wasn't much to choose from, and Sydney and I usually would bicker back and forth between what we wanted, and we finally decided on McDonald's. We finally decided on McDonald's, so we're sitting there in McDonald's eating our gross little Happy Meals. And here's Doris tucked back into a playland corner of this gross little McDonald's with gross little Happy Meals. And she just has this big, beautiful smile on her face. And I remember looking at her and seeing these beautiful red curls. And she had the most exquisite nails, and I thought she was the most incredible woman I'd ever laid eyes on. And I just remember sitting there watching her, and the way she was looking at my dad, and the way he didn't even know it. I didn't realize it then, but I realize now that was the first time I ever witnessed love. The kind of love that partners have for each other. And she was just so happy to just be there with him. And she was watching him being a father, and she didn't stop from there. So after that, we started doing weekends and doing holidays, and she went over the top. She decorated our bathroom in these little ocean theme, and she had a perfect little room set up for us, and bunk beds and matching comforters, and I'd never experienced that before. A beautiful home like that. And man, she would go over the top every Sunday. We'd wake up and she had French toast on the table and bacon, and she made her own little mochas, of course without the coffee, because we were hyper enough as it was. And Christmases, she'd go over the top with Christmas. She would have us all dress up, and then she would take pictures, and we'd had our own little glasses of sparkling apple cider, and she'd bring the ice bucket out, and it was this big ordeal, but it was just the four of us. And I never felt for once that I was not her daughter. She taught me how to cook. She taught me how to clean. And she taught me how to love. I never saw a woman so brave and so strong, and she would take on the world for me, and she never flinched. A few years ago, when my grandfather passed, It was another really hard time for me because I was stuck in a really, really bad marriage. And my boys were with me and I was alone. And some family had come up and I was standing next to Mom and I was holding on to her. And they said, "Where's your husband?" And I just started crying. And she was like, "That's enough. That's it." And she grabbed my hand and she marched across the room. She found one of our realtor friends and she's like, "We're buying her house. We're done. We're done with this." And she just swooped me up and saved me from that situation too, like she did before and before that. And the thing that really shocked me was how much she loved being a grandmother. My sister and I would harass her. She'd be in the bathroom and we're immediately, our little fingers, "What are you doing? Are you under there? What are you doing in there, Doris? What are you doing? Come out, come out, come out." She's like, "Seriously? Like, this is when you want to talk to me, when I'm in the bathroom?" And we harassed her. Not meaning to, but with those grand boys of hers though, she'd play hot balloon with them. She filled up a big old balloon in her nails and she's popping the balloon around and they're yelling and screaming and jumping all over the place and chasing her and she's laughing and she's running. And my dad looks at me and he goes, is that Doris?" She sits down and my youngest jumps on her lap and I'm like, "Get off of her." And she's like, "If I have a problem with it, I'll say something." And she holds him all close. And when I found out she was sick, I felt like all my security was suddenly gone. She always protected me and she was my champion. And I wanted to accomplish all these things in my life and show her I could be this amazing woman and get a degree and have this awesome career. And I wanted to prove to her that it was worth it, that I was worth it. But when I found out she was sick, I felt like I don't have enough time. I haven't done everything I'm supposed to do yet. So when I flew here and she let me come, she didn't want us to make a fuss over her. It was fine. It's not worth flying all the way over here for. But I was sitting there in the hospital room with her and I was kind of talking to her a little bit and she goes, "Honey, we all fight depression. We all have a hard time. We all feel sad and we all struggle, but we all do it together." That was her last gift to me, to remind me that I'm not weird or that I'm not troubled or that there's nothing wrong with me. I'm perfect just the way I am. And to just keep soldiering on, as she would say. "Buck up, soldier." That's what she always said to me. I'd go complaining to her about it and she'd go, "Buck up, soldier." The mother I am today and the woman I am today is solely because of her. She has changed our family and changed an entire generation that's to come from our family. Single-handedly isn't thanks to her. And I wish I had the time to really make sure she knew that, because every time I tried, she was so uncomfortable. She didn't want to hear it. I don't think there would ever be a way for me to express to you the level of her selflessness and her sacrifice and her devotion and her fierce loyalty and her capacity for love. So from now on, I'll try to just spread that same story to other people. She had such a hard life, but that had nothing to do with how she loved.
I have some telegrams from people who were not able to make it today. I'm so sorry that Sal and I can't be with all of you today to celebrate the life of our beautiful friend Doris Erickson. Her kindness and generosity will be remembered by all who knew her. We feel so fortunate to have been among the many whose lives were touched by her. From rescuing animals in need and spending thousands of volunteer hours sharing views of the night sky with strangers, to hosting holiday gatherings for all who otherwise would have spent the holiday alone, Doris will be remembered fondly. We will miss Doris, especially her smile and laughter, and we take comfort in knowing that she lived such a happy life with Chris. And we are grateful to know that Chris enjoyed the love and companionship of his wife and best friend Doris for 22 wonderful years. Sincerely, Maureen Salmi. I write this letter with a heavy heart. Chris, Ashley, Nancy, family, and friends, our prayers and thoughts are with you in this most difficult time. I pray that you and your family and friends will find comfort and strength in the days ahead. I met Doris about 8 years ago. Doris and Chris came to visit their parents, Rod and Nancy Erickson. Doris was quiet at first, but during our morning walks, I found her to be full of information and zest for life. Doris inspired Nancy Erickson and I to run a 5K in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I have never done that before, and I was a bit apprehensive, but Doris guided us through the process. She researched where to buy our special running shoes and took us to the path the day before. Doris also inspired my husband and I to go on our first political rally in CDA. I realized then how special she was. Doris was a strong, intelligent, and compassionate lady. I spent some time with Doris at Rod Erickson's memorial service. That is when I saw her demonstrate her love and compassion for her family. I wish I would have had the opportunity to get to know her better. Chris, please accept my deepest sympathy on the loss of your precious wife and best friend. Sincerely, Edith Robles. I did not have many opportunities to get to know Doris, but recently, when they traveled to Idaho for the eclipse, Chris and Doris visited the church I attend. Chris and Doris were talking to me about law school and my future career plans. And Doris wanted Chris to give me his business card in case I could use his contacts to help me get a job after law school. Doris thought so highly of Chris and his connections with people and places of authority that she wanted me to reap the benefits of his good reputation. Chris was trying to downplay it, but you could tell that Doris thought the world of Chris, and it showcased the type of selfless, supportive best friend Chris has described. With love, Heidi Keeley Miller. Doris, let me say that it comes with much regret that I did not send this card out sooner to you. The moment I saw the card, I was like, this is the most perfect card to send to you, for we met on the mountain stargazing. But I didn't write it in the card and get it out to you when my heart kept telling me to send it as soon as possible. I honestly feel so sad that I didn't get to tell you how grateful I am for you, how grateful that you were in my life. You took me in and took care of me when I had no family in Hawaii, where you two became like my ohana. Thank you for helping me when my car got stolen. I will never forget the email you two sent to me offering to sell me your tracker. I felt so blessed to have you two in my life looking after me. Thank you for telling me stories about your life in Alaska. I often daydream about our life was like on those small planes flying out to isolated places in Alaska. So fascinating. Thank you for sharing yours and Chris's adventures of going to see solar eclipses. So amazing. Thank you for helping me do my taxes. So grateful, and you never asked anything in return. You were so kind and generous. Thank you for my bearded Jake to go on adventures with me when I left Hawaii, which was so hard to do, and you supported me and gave me such a thoughtful gift. Thank you for always being there on the mountain. I always looked forward to seeing you two there. Always made my night. I was like family come up to visit. Doris, you will be forever loved, forever missed, forever thought of. I truly thank you for everything you have done for me. I pray a safe journey for you, and I pray you continue to look after us all. You will be remembered forever. Love you, Janet. We remember them. In the rising of the sun and its going down, we remember them. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of water, we remember them. In the opening of the buds and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. In the rustling of leaves and the beauty of autumn, in the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember them. So long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them, and until we see you again. In my prayers, Rebecca Fry. I knew Doris from work. We both worked for health and social services. She worked downtown and I worked in Midtown. I mean to say I knew of her. The word from the grapevine was that she was smart, hardworking, efficient, and she had a head, unlike me, for figures. I actually met Doris when she started to date her husband, Chris, my good friend and co-worker. I have to confess that I never went to lunch or hung out or became fast friends with Doris, but I know she was funny and adventurous and loving and true because she transformed Chris. She put a sparkle in his eye and a grin on his face that continued to grow over time. If Chris was a hand, Doris was the glove that fit it perfectly. If Chris was a camera, Doris was the lens that allowed him to filter the world. If Chris was Ed McCoon, Doris was the $1 million sweepstake. Godspeed, Doris. Take to the sky on wings. Chris will catch up with you as soon as he can. Lisa Simone. Christopher, our hearts grieve for your loss of your beloved Doris. Sorry. We know how much you loved her from the many times you spoke about her and how much happiness she gave you. You always looked so amazed that she chose you and then continued to love and support you. She loved you as much as you loved her with every part of her being. She always sounded matter-of-fact about how important you are to her. But everyone knew that seeing you two together was always great because we knew you were so happy. You told us so often, and it showed. She was welcoming, friendly, kind, intelligent, and fun to be around. She will always be missed. It is difficult to know what to say to you. We care, we hurt, and cry for you and your family. And hers is a life that ended too soon. Please accept our love and caring for you. Mi kalo aloha, Amelia and John. And now it's open mic.
Chris and daughters, I'm so happy and proud I could be here for this total accident. This was not a planned trip to Waikoloa. We're here for the Lava Man, and I won't say this is necessarily a coincidence. It happened and we're all here, but what I want to say is that with my wife Shelby, we've known Chris and then Doris since the late 1980s, and have respected Chris and enjoyed his company, and came to learn that he was one of the most over the course of our friendship and relationship, I've always thought of him as one of the smartest, most honorable, nicest person I've ever met, and I rate him as one of the top 5 people in my life. As far as influence and just being an all-around good guy. But until tonight, I didn't know the backstory, and I didn't understand that we all really have Doris to thank for that. So I would like to suggest that Doris, although she's gone now, she left us with a very, very wonderful person and gift, and I would like to suggest that we do our best to enjoy and comfort and help Chris in this time of need while we can, while he's here, and as long as we're able to. So Chris, thank you so much.
I see a lot of familiar faces in here. And when I first met Chris and Doris, it was through the Astronomy Club website. And I never will forget Chris's ending to his letters about we're looking for a place in Hawaii. My advice is free, and it's worth every penny of it. My wife and I, Kelly, came to know Chris and Doris by bike riding on Sundays and getting together for dinners. And we had a wonderful social relationship as well as astronomy with Chris. And I know this is about Doris, but I want to share that Chris was such an integral part of our relationship and making things just enjoyable for my wife Kelly and me. I truly will miss Doris, and I know Chris wishes there was a pause button in life, and unfortunately there isn't. And I wish I had 5 more minutes that I could just be with Doris too. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark's wife, so I figured this might be a good time to step up for a second. And I too very much enjoyed my experience every single Sunday. Chris and Doris and Mark and Kelly, and for a while some other people were courageous enough to actually come and bike along with us too. But we did it for many, many years, and we had a great time. The thing that I really, really enjoy the most about Doris is the way that I had my experience of how I was when I was around her. Sometimes people are challenging to be around. I'm in the talking to people business. That's what I do. I'm a therapist. And so sometimes people can be really challenging. But whenever my mind would think, oh, we're going to spend time with Doris, it was never, oh, it was like, oh, great, because Doris allowed you to have a space where you could just be comfortable. She wouldn't make it about her. She was as funny as could be, and she had a little bit of a dry sense of humor like I have, so we really, really got along that way. But I really look forward to spending time with her, and I can't always say that about people, but with Doris I could certainly say that. You know, Doris was a person that you'd go, oh good, I'm going to see Doris. So that's what I enjoy most, is my experience of how I felt when I was with Doris. So thank you.
I'm Tony. I met Chris through astronomy too, and driving over the hill, I found out Chris actually has a sense of humor. Not everybody gets to see it. But I remember talking about our wives. You know, the only fault with our wives is their poor taste in men. And I said, thanks for that one, Chris. And behind every successful man, there's a surprised woman. I remember that one too. And, you know, getting to know Doris, you realize the truth of it is behind every successful man or every good man, there is a loving, caring, determined, strong woman. And I saw that in Doris a lot. And, that picture kind of reminds me that we were at a restaurant and there was a blue marlin, the head of a blue marlin right there. And I remember going out with Doris fishing, and we were just beat. It was the end of the day. We had this big long lure trailing out behind the kayak, and she was at the controls. And I said, God, is that a shark? I said, no, the fin's wrong, the color's wrong. And what about that? And she looks around, I said, oh, that's a blue marlin. I said, well, do you want to go out after it, or do you want to head in? No, let's go get it. It was longer than the boat. And it would have been a 25-mile-an-hour trip to Maui in reverse. And so, but she was wanting to turn around. I said, I think I'll tangle the line in the rudder and use that as an excuse. So I did that. We didn't actually go. You know, I love hearing her stories about Alaska. They're absolutely riveting. You know, and what kind of a woman will set off on any mode of transportation, a snow machine, a dog sled, finish it up on snowshoes in the middle of nowhere by herself. That, you know, that kind of strength and determination can really help a guy over life, you know. A lot of times I wanted to hug her. She wasn't much for that kind of stuff, but I did get to hug her a couple times. I could see that she had a hard day, you know, and see it in her eyes. I'm still amazed that she let you have a complete astronomy lab in the dining room. I don't know how to do that yet.
Yeah.
Like, I guess the last thing I want to say is, yeah, I take to heart about the pictures and take more pictures, and but the one thing I know about you, Chris, is you have a huge heart and a great mind, and there's room in there to remember all those recent times where you don't have the pictures. So when you get to missing those times, let's sit down and talk story. You know, maybe that'll help refresh some of it. You know, and you've got a great family to take care of. Go on and do that. I guess I could probably go on, but that's the main part of it.
I'm Brad, and I'm another one of the misfit astronomy guys that Chris pulled in and kept around and stuff. Him and I made a lot of trips up to Mauna Loa to work on stuff, and I didn't spend a whole lot of time, get to spend a whole lot of time with Doris herself, but I knew her pretty well just from the way Chris would describe her and talk about her and talk about the girls and the family he is so proud of, so happy with. My wife and I came from Minnesota, which he likes to remind me of quite often, almost 5 years ago, and they took us in, you know, for Christmas dinners, Thanksgiving dinners. Like Chris mentioned, he'd open it up to friends and stuff like that. And she was always the most gracious. She was always wonderful there. This past Christmas, we would have no idea that there was anything wrong with her. She was bubbly, she was energetic, it seemed. It just, when we found out about this, it blew us away. It just didn't make sense. Chris, it was mentioned, but, well, she may no longer be here in person. She's got a lot of it with you. So.
Hi, I'm Garnet Olson, and we flew in from Portland today. So if I'm a little not all here, it's because it's been a long day. Oh, speak up some more? Okay. I just wanted to say, my husband introduced me to Chris, and this was way back when he was married to his first wife, and the children were really small. And then we went through the transition to Doris, and it was really wonderful to go visit Chris and Doris in their house. And we were privy to all the difficulties that were going on, and they just kept going and kept doing all the right things. And sorry, part of this is because I'm tired, but one thing that wasn't mentioned is Doris knew a lot of, she did some cute little beading things for a few years. She made these little pouches and just these intricate things. And I'm pretty sure she gave me this necklace and bracelet set. So she's very creative. And so I was just really glad to know her.
Oh, I did have one more thing to say. When we moved in our house, Doris spent a lot of time making this gorgeous beadwork. What?
I forgot it.
No, you didn't forget it. You put it out and I got it. You did. I saw it. You brought it out and I brought it. But it has these beautiful flowers and birds, and she spent all that time putting it together. So it's been hanging in our house since. You know.
I have mine too. She made me this one. She's very detail oriented and subtle, but yet there.
I will miss my friend.
Oh, she will.
Going once. Going twice. Thank you, everybody. It's really touching to me, and it really touches my heart. All of you have come here, especially some that have come from Vancouver, others have come from Alaska, others have come from Oregon, and some come from Illinois that are here today. That this means so much to me. Even those of you that came from across town, it means such a total, I mean, the words kind of describe how much this means to me to have you guys here and support us. You know, Doris was the most fantastic secret that anybody could have ever kept. And I'm so glad I had a chance today to share a little bit of her story and who she was and what she meant to me with you, because, you know, in this hustle and bustle of the world, that people get forgotten and we all move on because we have to, because there's so much to do and there's so much to distract us every day. And Doris never wanted appreciation, she never wanted accreditation, she never wanted acknowledgement. She was content with showing love through service. She wasn't the kind of person that would tell you she loved you. She was the kind of person that would show you she loved you. I mean, the things she would do for the kids, you know, as far as, you know, her massive dowry that she had, her financial empire she'd accumulated, so much of it she spent on my daughters. And she never once asked for an acknowledgement of that. She never once complained about it. She never once reminded me of how much she spent. She just did it. And if I expressed acknowledgement, she would act embarrassed or awkward, like, well, what else was I supposed to do? I couldn't sit there and let them suffer like that. Of course I had to.
I thank her for something, and she goes, nah, thank your dad.
Yeah, thank your dad. No, thank Doris. But she was a fantastic person, and I really appreciate all of you being here and sharing these moments and letting me share my stories with you about what a person she was, and do what I can to make sure that she's remembered. And there were people that were, for age or distance or other issues or health issues, couldn't be here today. And if all goes well, we're going to have a great video that they're going to be able to hear the stories and hear those of you that came up and shared your stories, that they'll be able to see those. And that means an awful lot to me. So I think we're going to, at this point, we've got a lot of food that's getting warm over there. And that feel free to mingle, and I'm going to turn the music back on. This music is a bunch of Doris's favorite songs, so it's not necessarily memorial music. I mean, there's things like Meatloaf in here. There's things like Rod Stewart in here. You know, You Touched My Heart, You Touched My Soul. I mean, those are her favorite songs. And one of her favorite songs of all was Meatloaf, believe it or not, that you took the words right out of my mouth. It must have been when you were kissing me. I mean, that was one of her top 5 favorite songs of all time. And one more story I'll share, 2 seconds, is that when I thought this relationship's getting really serious, we're in the dog truck and we're heading out to potato fields north of Anchorage to do dog training. I thought, you know, this relationship could get serious, really serious. I wonder if she's okay with how silly I like to be sometimes. And so I spontaneously launched into singing The Battle of New Orleans by Johnny Horton. Some of it. In 1814, we took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi. We took a little bacon and we took a little beans. Anyway, so I wanted to see what her reaction was when I started singing this crazy, silly song from the 60s. She joined in and she knew the words. And at that point I knew this could be true love. So with that, and that last happy thought, I want to thank you all again for coming, and feel free to come over here and eat everything in sight. And there's a cooler full of drinks, and drink everything in sight. And we'll continue to share Doris's memory. Thank you.